Hi folks, welcome back and thanks for joining. So today we're going to make our own embossing powder. Now this video was inspired by a subscriber who calls herself one of my most loyal subscribers. Well, with comments like that, you get your own video, Elizabeth. Now her question to me was, can we make our own embossing powder because what you buy is horrifically expensive? So I did some checking around and I found something that I think is going to work for us. So we're going to go through that. Now we don't need a lot. What we need is an acrylic floor finish and vinegar. Now we're going to add some water to that. But what we're going to do is we're going to precipitate the acrylic out of the floor finish, and we're going to use an acid, and in this case we're going to use vinegar. Now after that we're going to rinse it, we're going to dry it, we're going to grind it up, and we're going to have our very own DIY embossing powder for a fraction of the cost of what you have to pay for from a commercial art supplier. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so before we get started, let me point out a place that I ran into trouble with looking for an acrylic floor finish, and that is in particular this product right here. When I looked at it, and I looked front and back, and I read the labels very carefully, and this seemed to be an acrylic wax. And I'll pour some out side by side with a wax that I know is acrylic because I use it myself. As you see, they look identical. However, there's no acrylic in this, or if there is, there's so little I can't get it to precipitate out. So I'm looking on the label to find a clue that I had missed when I was reading it, and there's really nothing until I get down to here where it says do not use on wood, cork, or unsealed ceramic surfaces. Now, an unsealed ceramic surface should have been my indication that this was not acrylic, because acrylic is a fine sealer for ceramic surfaces. So, and I'm going to show you the difference. First, let me show you what will not work. Perhaps. This is 30% vinegar. You can use household vinegar, the white vinegar. You can use acetic acid. You can use a weak hydrochloric acid. Any kind of weak acid will do. And no matter how much vinegar I put in here, I'm not getting a reaction. And I tried and tried and tried it over and over again to get something to work. And it's simply, there's no acrylic in this, even though they look identical. We can stir as much as we want, and nothing is going to precipitate out. Okay, so be careful. Now, when I looked online, and if that's where you want to get your wax, the better waxes will tell you the amount of solids. I saw standard reports of 25% solids and 33% solids. Now I use this. I don't know what the percentage of solids this is, but this is a product that is made in the USA. This company has been around for a very long time, since 1962, and I know it has acrylic in it. So let me show you the difference. And I know that I added water blast on that. It really doesn't matter. There's no acrylic in it. Let me see if I can get this closer so you can see how quickly the reaction occurs. And I'm going to stop the video and move the camera closer just so you can get a good look at what you should be seeing when you find the right wax. Alright, so now I'm going to start piping in the vinegar, and you will see the reaction right away. Do you see that right there? That's the acrylic. That's the reaction that you should expect. If you don't get that, you don't have acrylic wax. Now, what we're doing here is the acrylic is held in emulsion at a pH of around 9. And when we start piping in the vinegar, we're lowering the pH, causing the acrylic to come out of solution. And you can use a good bit of vinegar. I did quite a bit myself because I want to get as much of the acrylic out of the wax as I can. And there's really no measurement. I'm using a similar quantity here that I've already experimented with, and I will show you that later. But first I'm going to go through the entire process with you. So that's a good bit of vinegar, and as you can see, the acrylic is clumping up very nicely here. And just as a reference, the other stuff, absolutely nothing. Junk. Okay. It's still a little bit milky, and the clumps are still rather large, so I'm going to add even just a bit more vinegar to see if I can grab some more of the acrylic. Now, if you're counting, each one of those squirts was about 1.5 milliliters. But I think a project like this is more by eye. And you've seen me do this before, where I precipitated casein protein from milk using the same process, where I just simply used vinegar. Okay, there we have it. And the clumps are getting smaller. So now I've added a substantial amount of vinegar to the point now where the clumps have actually gone down in size, and that doesn't really matter because of the way I'm going to capture the acrylic now. And what I'm going to use is a coffee filter, and the only thing that's going to get through that coffee filter is the vinegar. And I have a little pipette here because I'm going to show you another trick on how to recover even more of the acrylic. So we're just going to pour that in. Okay. And now I'm going to just rinse the bowl a little bit, add a bit of water, swish it around a little. Let's see if I can get more of that acrylic out of the bowl. Now, this yields a considerable amount of acrylic, but what you don't get out, you have to wash down the drain. So, why not get it? Alright, now, as you can see, what runs off, I'll hold this up so you can see it. What runs off is pretty much just water and vinegar. Of course, there are other chemicals in this wax, and that is still in the acrylic. But we're going to rinse that out. Now here's a little trick. Now that it's gone down a bit, I have the water next to me, and I'm just going to start washing down the sides of the coffee filter as it's draining, and I'm going to wash down all of that acrylic. Now we need to wash the vinegar out of the acrylic anyway, and this action right here is simply helping you while it's draining. And just continue to wash down the sides of the coffee filter, letting it drain into the bowl. And I think we'll let that finish. I'm going to very quickly pour off some water. And let that little bit finish into the bowl right there. That's a very good amount. We're going to wash down the sides just a little bit more. All right. Now at this point, what I did was I took the coffee filter out once all the water had drained down, and I had laid it on a plate, and I popped that on warm in the oven, and it took a couple of cycles of about 10 minutes each to dry out the water, drive off the water out of the acrylic. So I'm going to stop the video, and we're going to pull that out of the oven, and you're going to see me grind it up. Alright, so here's the part that we just made. It has drained, and I'm going to let that drain just a little bit more. But here's what I did before, and it was a similar amount. So once it's dried, we've lost a lot of water, so we have shrank down quite a bit. Now this is about as far as it's going to shrink. It's nice and dry, and it's stuck to the coffee filter just a little bit, so you can use I really don't know, wax paper, but you can't put wax paper in an oven because the wax will simply melt onto your acrylic, and that's not desirable. But I'm not having too much trouble getting this off of the filter paper. I do think you want to be careful and not pull any of the paper from the coffee filter off and into your hard work here. Seems to be able to stay relatively intact. If you're in doubt, simply don't use it. You're saving a lot of money doing it this way. Okay. Now I'm going to just pulse this. This is just a little mini blender, and I'm going to continue to pulse this until I have a fine powder. I'm going to do it one time just so you'll see it start. Okay. First I have to figure out how the cup goes on. I know there's a specific procedure for that. Call it idiot switch. Okay, so I'm going to continue to do that, and once I have this ground up, I'll be back. Alright, so I've ground it up and I have distributed the powder into a new coffee filter, and I noticed that there is a lot of dust on the inside of my little blender. So if you wanted to reclaim that, I would suggest simply spritz some alcohol on it, pour it onto a separate filter, and let the alcohol evaporate so that you can recover what's inside your mixer. I'm not going to do that for the purpose of the video, but that would be my suggestion. And I don't have stamp pads, things like that, but what I always have handy is what is in the ink. That gives it its inkiness, and that is, I'm going to spread on a little glycerin. Now, I don't have a heat gun either, but I do have a heating hot plate and a hair dryer, and I am using the hot plate to help heat up the paper before I put on the hair dryer. I hope I'm doing this right. Shake it off, if I recall. Chop it off. It's already begun to melt. The paper was hot, so it's already beginning to stick. I can't shake any off, but you get the idea. And then apply the hair dryer or heat gun. I can't generate enough heat, so I'm going to pop this into the oven. I see a couple sparkles forming, so I'm going to transfer this into the oven and crank up the heat and see if I can get a melt. Alright, so for those of you that don't have a heat gun like me, what I did is I popped this into the oven. I set the temperature for 400 degrees for 10 minutes, and I have a nice clear bead melted. Now, parts of it were burned from where it was sitting on the hot plate, so those are a little bit scorched, but even those, they have a nice amber clear color. Now, what I went ahead and did was I dried out what we made, and I separated a little bit of it, and I added some acrylic paint. Mixed that up, dried it out, and I made some very dark green embossing powder, and I also put that on a piece of paper and dried it in the oven as well. For this, I lowered the temperature. This was 400 degrees, and I set this at 350 for a little bit longer time, and I never really got hot enough. Putting this on paper, if you're going to put this in the oven, it's probably not the best choice. A heat gun is really needed for something like this. So, but I see some green sparklies in here from where it did melt just a little bit. Alright, so we made embossing powder using regular acrylic floor finish. We precipitated it out using vinegar. We rinsed it, we dried it, we ground it up, and instead of using ink, which of course is another expense unless you want the color, I used just glycerin. Now you can add food color to glycerin. You can also add food color to this, and your results will be just as spectacular for a much lower cost. Alright, so there we have it. If you found this video helpful, well, please subscribe. And I've been encouraged to mention that this channel does have a Patreon account if you wanted to support the work that we're doing here. That would be much appreciated. And I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you found this valuable. And see you next time, where we're going to make a sustainable version of embossing powder. And I think you're going to like that. Take care now. Bye-bye.